looks like it could be useful.
Good day to you all. It is a pleasure to have you on my channel again. Today marks the beginning of an adventurous journey through the realms of the original Remnant from the Ashes video game, completed on the Apocalypse difficulty setting. For those not familiar with the title, it is a third-person shooter action-adventure RPG. You are washed ashore at an island overrun by the Root, which are gnarly and twisted tree-like enemies that are intending to consume everything in their path. Each world is inhabited by challenging overworlds and dungeons with elite-type individuals strewn amidst the regular fodder, and world bosses that the player must eliminate to proceed with the story. It is possible to play alone, or as a duo or trio cooperatively. I would say the game feels most rewarding to play alone, but it can certainly be more fun to play with friends. As you may have noticed, there are items that are flashing by on the screen. These are account-bound rewards that are shared throughout all characters in your profile, and they are unlocked mostly by defeating various bosses while playing through the game with the hardcore modifier, or in the adventure mode setting. For this playthrough, I imposed the rule to do my best and not use any of these rewards. This decision was taken because these items would not be available to the player the first time you start a new playthrough, and I wanted to mimic an authentic first playthrough as much as possible. Interestingly, this added an unintentional side challenge, as I had to remember and distinguish between the items I picked up during my run and the items I had obtained from the start. I also did not use any of the elixirs of enlightenment found inside the survivor bag, as they were originally only available to players who pre-purchased the game. In hindsight, I realized this was a mistake on my part, as the survivor bag and its contents was made readily available for everyone to enjoy a while back. My general approach throughout the playthrough was to pace through the overworld and side dungeons as fast as possible, while also fully exploring each map in search of useful items. For the most part, I was running around just like now and dispatching enemies in a rapid manner and then focusing on looting. Many hours of playing this game has alerted me to the fact that it is a good principle to destroy breakables for extra scrap and upgrading materials, because upgrading equipment in Remnant from the Ashes is expensive. A major part of the Apocalypse experience also resides in the fact that there is often not enough ammunition in the arena to take down any of the major bosses without utilizing ammo boxes. And ammo boxes are incredibly expensive at 200 scraps apiece, 4 times the price of the other common consumables like bloodworts and bandages. To summarize, the economy on this difficulty setting relies to some extent on breaking chairs, boxes, barricades, etc. to generate enough scraps to afford upgrades and purchasing supplies. When it comes to picking a starting class, I prefer the Hunter. The class is suited for mid to long range accurate shooting and picking enemies off before they get close to you. The armor set provides an excellent 20% damage buff to all ranged attacks, and the weapon mod is excellent for general awareness, as it displays the outline of all enemies within range even through walls and other geometry. The weapon mod also provides an increased critical hit chance, which is of course beneficial, but not as much so during the early game, when you lack the appropriate traits and upgrades to consistently output critical hits. So why did I pick the ex-cultist as my starting class? The answer was because I wanted to have some variety in my playthrough, at least in the beginning. Later on, I gathered enough scraps to transition into the Hunter class by purchasing the corresponding equipment from rigs in Ward 13. The standard Hunter class will always be a strong overall build in my opinion during any campaign. But Auraxed, what about the third class, Scrapper? Well, personally I'm not overly enthusiastic about the Scrapper class. I think it works well enough as an upfront and in-your-face tank class in a duo or a trio cooperative setting, but the weighty armor and subpar shotgun is not desirable on the higher difficulty settings, where it is safer to take down enemies from afar rather than allowing them to get within melee range to ensure a maximum damage output. The heavy armor also depletes stamina at an accelerated rate, and provides you with the second slowest roll in the game. Both of these factors combined have a critical impact on your ability to survive any elite type enemy and boss encounters in the world. I would say that the two main benefits of the Scrapper class are the Scrap Hammer and Hotshot weapon mod. The former being the hardest hitting melee weapon in the game and also the most fun to use, and the second being one of the best weapon mods in the game. But as I mentioned previously, you can just purchase these items from rigs in Ward 13 should you want them, as long as you can afford the scrap. With that being said, time to focus on some gameplay until the first dungeon. Here is a typical fight with some devils and a slayer. This combination of regular and special enemies is a common sight while traversing through the world, albeit the types will change depending on the realm. Listening to sound cues is very important, as this tells you when new enemies target you or when they are spawned. All enemies have a sound cue for when they are alerted to you, and there are also sounds for certain attacks that help with the dodge timings. My recommendation in these fights is to always eliminate the weaker enemies first, as this quickly reduces the overall threat against you. Devils can be easily picked off at a distance even with the repeater pistol, as long as you aim for the head, which is their weak spot. I found it simplest to do the following: headshot, wait for the stagger animation so the head comes back to position, headshot, wait for stagger, and then repeat this process until the target is dead. This can be effectively repeated across multiple targets at once, since there is a 1 to 2 second time frame while they are staggered. In general, damage above a certain number will stagger most common enemies, which is why you see the coach gun staggering enemies almost all the time. This is also why on extreme ranges, even with weak spots considered, enemies will not always stagger. For the Slayer, the best approach is to have a proper long gun in your inventory. In other words, not the coach gun, as these enemies will be teleporting away from you during the fight. The Slayer will always teleport to a spot with direct line of sight towards the player. Because this mechanic is so predictable, it can be easily abused. For example, by positioning yourself in a spot where there is cover on both sides, forcing the Slayer to spawn directly in front of you. I also feel like you can almost hear where the Slayer will reappear, based on the audio spatial input during the teleportation, so you can reposition your aim to where they will reappear and then shoot them immediately afterwards. Anyhow, these fights are usually over relatively pain-free, as long as you're able to hit the head, which is the weak spot. If the distance is anything longer than medium to close range, their attacks can be easily dodged by simple sidestepping. You usually don't have to even dodge their attacks unless you're really close range, which is rare due to the teleportation mechanic. If you do get hit, there is a risk that you may start bleeding. The bleeding status effect is a debuff that deals damage to you over 20 seconds and halves all your healing while it is active. It is possible to have up to 3 bleeding stacks at once. To cure this ailment you need a bandage. These can be purchased from Reggie in Ward 13 for 50 scrap. The first side dungeon I discovered was Junktown, which is not really a dungeon, more like a small shop that houses the Mad Merchant. The Mad Merchant is constantly muttering nonsense, and if you talk to him, you should not inquire too eagerly about the mask, or else he will fight you. My recommendation is to first pick the neutral choice to be able to use his shop, and then kill him afterwards to obtain the mask he's wearing. This fight always confuses me, as sometimes it feels as if I'm getting one shot, while other times I barely take chip damage. This is because of the shotgun he is using, which is the same 7-round shotgun that the Scrapper class begins with. As long as you stay at mid-range as much as possible during the fight, you should not have to worry too much about dying. The Mad Merchant will mostly hide behind cover around his shop, and you can shoot him whenever he peeks out of it. Having a long-range rifle helps for accurate headshots. Lastly, I will say that if you're very aware during the fight, you can count the number of shots he's fired, as he will have to reload after the 7th shell. This gives you a golden opportunity to rush him and finish him off. With him defeated, I obtained the Twisted Mask, which is one of 2 head armor pieces you can obtain for the Twisted Armor set. The special property with this item in particular is that it has the most imbalanced rot resistance in the game, at plus 36. It also provides a constant healing over time effect, which is great for when taking chip damage. Since I sat down at the checkpoint to stock up on ammunition, all enemies I took down previously in the overworld were now respawned. So once again I applied the same principles as mentioned earlier to take them down before proceeding towards the next dungeon. One mechanic that I have not yet discussed is switching views while aiming. The default setting is that the camera is positioned above the right shoulder, but this can be changed while aiming down sights and pressing the shift key. This is useful in certain situations as you can stay in cover and fire around objects without receiving any damage in return, which is something that is not possible to do with the default camera setting. But you should know that the angle where you can deal damage while still being covered is quite small, so it takes some getting used to. As you can see, fighting the Slayer is not so challenging, as it only has one attack that is heralded by a clear audio and visual cue in the form of a bowstring being pulled back and a red light that flashes momentarily before firing. One of the ways the developers have chosen to increase the difficulty curve of the game is to throw weaker enemies into the mix whilst fighting the elites. I cannot say I particularly enjoyed this feature, especially in some of the upcoming boss fights, and I remember it being one of the most negatively viewed aspects of the game upon release. Still, with the correct strategies applied, these encounters should be manageable enough to avoid any major frustrations. You may die sometimes, no matter how skilled you are, but even then, the runbacks in this game are generally short enough not to instill any greater ire.
It's over.
After clearing the remaining devils and rounding the next corner, it was time to say hello to the Hulk for the first time. The Hulk is an elite type enemy, which carries a giant sword casually slung over their shoulder as they are patrolling. They are quite robust enemies, considering they have no weak spots and even carry armor on parts of their body. Luckily, they are quite the slow, lumbering fellows most of the time. The best way to deal with them is to keep a medium distance and shoot them as you're walking backwards. Shoot a few rounds, turn around and run away to maintain distance. Shoot a few rounds, rinse, repeat. After a while, the Hulk will charge towards you. This is the easiest attack to dodge, because you can circumvent the attack entirely simply by running to the right side of the Hulk as the attack occurs. I view Hulks as a resource draining enemy, as they require considerable ammunition to bring down. Therefore, I often opt for a partial melee approach when fighting Hulks, which can definitely be considered as somewhat of a high risk and little reward type of choice. Still, it is fun to melee the Hulk. It is one of the few enemies in the game that feels exciting to have a bit of a boxing match with. Years ago, when this game released, I remember doing a melee only challenge video against the boss that is based on these enemies. I'll leave a link to it in the description for those interested in watching it. For now, it is time for the World Heavyweight Champion to be crowned. Auraxed versus the Hulk. Fists versus Big Effing Sword. One small mistake in dodge timing would mean instant death. But, in the end, down the Hulk goes, and I remain as the undefeated champion of the arena. The next part was just me searching the rest of the overworld for loot. Sadly, I did not find any new equipment, and I eventually made my way into the next dungeon. If you would like to skip ahead until the next interesting section, you can go to 1722 in the video, or click the timestamp I have added in the video description.
it's over.
If you remember the very first location at the start of the game, that was the Founder's Hideout. That's where I broke the wooden shelves in front of the hole in the wall, went into the adjacent room and picked up the Drifter's overcoat and trousers. I also picked up an oilskin tonic and, more importantly, the Ward 13 keycard. This item unlocks the locked doors in Ward 13, so I went back to finish looting Ward 13 before I proceeded further with the main story. While focusing purely on looting, I switched to the Adventurer set for 20% more scrap and 35% higher loot chance from all breakables. This allowed me to get just about enough scrap to purchase the Hunter's Mark and Hotshot weapon mods, as well as the hunting rifle. Another reason to go back to Ward 13 now is to grab the submachine gun. To obtain it, there is a small puzzle you have to complete first. I will go through each step after finishing looting the upper parts of Ward 13, so stay tuned or skip ahead to 20:01 in the video.
Keep moving.
Good to... Certainly. So long.
What next? Yeah? Better be worth my time. We're done here? Told them I could. I'm only so... Both gone, but hey. Take care then.
To obtain the submachine gun, simply follow these steps. Start by going down the stairs to floor B2. Swipe the Ward 13 keycard in the keycard reader. Open the doors and loot the first corridor. Don't forget to press E on the tape recorder in this room to earn the Elder Knowledge trait. Go to the farthest room on the left side and pick up the fuse. Now go down to floor B3. plug in the fuse in the breaker box. Use the lever to turn on the power. Go to the locked door and swipe the Ward 13 keycard in the keycard reader. Open the doors and immediately turn back and turn off the power. Go back through the doors, hold left and walk past the turbine fans into the hidden room. Grab the Ward 13 master key. I like to finish looting floor B3 because there is a lot of loot down there, but this is optional and can be done whenever you want. Most likely though, you will never revisit here until the very end of the game. Spoilers! So I think now is the best time to loot this area. With floor B3 fully looted, go back to floor B2 and continue looting the right-hand corridor. Make your way to the end of the corridor and walk up the stairs. Use the Ward 13 master key on the locked door and then pick up the submachine gun inside the room. I personally do not favor the submachine gun due to its lack of stopping power, but it has a high rate of fire and a high capacity magazine, so it could be a viable choice for players who prefer to deal some serious lead. With this sort of side quest out of the way, it was time to get back to the first proper dungeon of the campaign. But first, since I managed to scrounge up more than 750 scrap from looting floors B2 and B3, I was able to purchase the Hunter's Mark weapon mod, allowing me to depart from Ward 13 with my favorite weapon and weapon mods in my inventory. To maximize the effectiveness of these mods, I would strongly recommend slotting the hotshot on the hunting rifle and the Hunter's Mark on the repeater pistol. This is advantageous for a number of reasons. The Hunter's Mark is a supportive mod that benefits all weapons simultaneously. Therefore, it makes more sense to place this on the weaker weapon and keep the more offensive-oriented hotshot mod on the stronger weapon. By similar logic, the hunting rifle gets a larger benefit from the 15% damage buff while the mod is active. The mod also gets charged faster with higher damage, as mod power generation is directly tied to damage dealt. Finally, the higher damage hits are also more likely to inflict the burning status effect on enemies. With that said, let's go to the dungeon. The first thing I knew when I got into this dungeon was that the boss was going to be Gorefist. This was easily predicted since I got the Sunken Passage dungeon, which always leads to the grinder, where you face this boss. Gorefist is a larger version of the Hulk, and is one of two dungeon bosses you may randomly encounter on Earth, Shroud being the other alternative. I would have loved to get the Hidden Sanctum dungeon instead, and face Shroud at the end, because the adds are a lot simpler to manage, and the boss itself is much quicker to bring down due to the head being a weak spot. Let us talk a little bit about the dungeon itself. The Sunken Passage is mostly inhabited by hollows and rootworts, with a few elite enemies thrown in at various times. But even if the dungeon is mostly inhabited by these fodder-type demons, you can quickly become overrun. The rootworts in particular will kill you in one hit if they explode near you, and the hollows sometimes rush you in great numbers. I have played this game for hundreds of hours, yet I have still to figure out why the computer sometimes spawns large groups of hollows out of nowhere. It would make sense if it was tied to some larger enemy controlling them, but I have not found any such connection yet. It might be coupled to the spawn of an elite enemy, or perhaps to the progress you have made in the dungeon. I based this hypothesis mostly on previous encounters, where it was common for elites to spawn around the halfway point and near the exit of the dungeons. If you know more about this, please comment below. The Hunter's Mark is coming to good use in this dungeon, as it displays all enemies near me, allowing me to plan my approach in a better way. For example, if there is a group of hollows around the corner, I would know not to run straight into the room. Rather, I would peek through the corner and pick them off one by one. It also helps with pre-aiming, as you can place your reticule where enemies will appear. This mod is also excellent for spotting high threat enemies such as rootworts or elites. The next elite enemy I came across in this playthrough was a Juggernaut. The Juggernaut is an elite enemy with a huge hand cannon as its main offensive tool. It can sustain quite accurate fire from a long range, and to compensate for this, it has a very slow movement speed. Once it has spotted the player, it slowly stalks towards you, charges up its rifle, and starts spraying down bullets in your general direction. The strategy to beat this creature is to either take it down from a very long range, or make sure that you have cover nearby to hide behind when it is shooting. Simply stay behind cover while it is firing, and then peek out and shoot the Juggernaut in between its firing cycles. If you have cover on your right side, you can switch shoulders while aiming and shoot the Juggernaut without taking any damage yourself. After taking enough damage, the Juggernaut will stumble, giving you a chance to deal some extra damage before it starts shooting again. In this encounter, I was able to fire at it through the sewer grates, and I managed to take it down without taking any damage. The next major item I picked up was the Tarnished ring. The Tarnished ring is a key item that you may randomly find on Earth. Key items are easily identified by the bright orange colored effect above them. The ring is somewhat of a hidden quest item that you might not know what to do with if you haven't spoken at length with Reggie back in Ward 13. If you inquire about his past, he will speak about a ring he once wore and describe it as his greatest treasure. Exhaust his dialogue and you can show him the Tarnished ring. After doing so, you complete the hidden quest and earn the scavenger trait. That is something I will do later in the video. This is a good example of how splitting damage between multiple enemies can stagger them and allow you to get away without taking any damage. By focusing fire on the 2 to 3 hollows that were closest to me, I could stop them in their tracks just long enough for me to get some distance, reload my sidearm, and finish them off. Some general information about rootworts. Every time a rootwort is destroyed, they explode and leave behind a cloud that deals rot damage, which also builds up the rot status effect on your character's status bar. This explosion can be favorably exploited to damage nearby enemies, but be careful not to step inside the cloud. Becoming afflicted with the rot disease is not desirable, as your character will cough at random times, preventing you from performing any other action for a short while. Sooner than later, this will inexorably lead to your demise, because your character was too busy coughing to be able to dodge or deal damage. Luckily, the rot status effect can be removed by using an oilskin tonic, which is why I have them in one of my item quick slots. Using an oilskin tonic also increases rot damage resistance by 30% for 10 minutes, and thus is an excellent choice if you're struggling with the boss coming up. The Sapper is another elite enemy, and one that is very similar to the Slayer. It has the same teleportation mechanics and also uses a bow to fire arrows. The main difference is that the Sapper fires explosive arrows that deal rot damage instead of bleed. Also, the arrows are heavier, so they travel in a slight arch. These arrows stay embedded on any surface they land on, including the player, and will then explode after a brief period of time, dealing rot damage. It can be good to know that the damage from this explosion can be entirely negated by performing a successful dodge when the arrow detonates. It also seems to me that the arrows explode much faster if they hit the player as opposed to hitting the ground. It is also possible to shoot the arrows from the ground to prematurely detonate them. Otherwise, the ultimate tactic will always be to shoot the Sapper in the head, and it should go down readily. Now let's go through the plan for the upcoming boss. Firstly, I would say I was rather unlucky that Gorefist got the regenerator modifier, as this meant that it was constantly regenerating health through the fight. Considering that up to this point I had not found a single piece of additional equipment, no necklace, no rings, and the first main boss, who is already healthy enough from the start and has no weak spots, also had health regeneration, that's definitely what you could call a rough start for this fresh character playthrough. My strategy for Gorefist was the following: Coach Gun with Hotshot mod for increased firepower and also to negate the regenerator healing effect. Hunter's Mark on my repeater pistol to help track the root wart adds that Gorefist summons while enraged. Start the fight in the first room and then transition into the big open space on the first floor. Stay the rest of the fight as much as possible in the open room, as this gives you more time to deal with the root warts before they reach you. Always prioritize destroying the root warts over dealing damage to the boss during the enraged phases. Gather ammunition between the enraged phases. Repeat until the boss is dead. Sounds simple enough, does it not? Yes indeed, it would be quite simple if it was not for the fact that a single hit either by the boss itself or a root wart explosion would instantly kill me. And because enemies in this game can damage each other, there are situations where you will die despite perfectly dodging both the boss and the root warts, simply because the moment after you dodge, the boss kills a root wart that blows up and kills you instead. A somewhat funny blame the RNG moment that has happened to me more often than I would like to admit is when Gorefist kills one root wart that then explodes, and the explosion takes out another root wart like a chain reaction, and the second root wart kills you. It feels very unrewarding dying in this way, as you know you have done everything in your power to survive, yet the game punishes you with a death out of your control. But it's also a bit funny seeing Gorefist paying no heed to friend or foe, and just completely obliterating root warts left and right. I guess it can be considered as a part of the fight that you should learn to manipulate to increase your chances of surviving. Just like other enemies, Gorefist also takes damage from root wart explosions, but will take no damage from standing in the rot cloud. So to summarize, prioritize adds over the boss during the enraged phase, use the Hotshot mod to negate the regenerator effect, and don't step into the rot clouds left behind after the root warts. My initial attempt against this boss was semi-successful, until I misjudged the pathing of one of the root warts. It seemed to me that it was going to go around the pillar on the left side, but it took a shortcut and it ended up costing me my life. Let's take a look at the winning attempt.
Damn it!
After beating Gorefist, I always loot its arena, as I know there should be a couple of ammo boxes around and some extra scrap to be found from the breakables.
I can't believe it! I'm alive!
The next major location was Mudtooth's hideout, which is a big helicopter that somehow got stranded in the middle of the street. Inside is an old man named Mudtooth, and after listening to all his stories, and he has a lot of stories to share, he gifts you the pocket watch, which was the first major item of this playthrough. The pocket watch increases stamina regeneration by 20 units per second, and also reduces stamina cost by 20%. Thus making it a great early game item to acquire. In short, it allows you to perform an extra dodge and to run 1/5 of the distance extra for each full stamina bar consumed. It is a good item for exploration, looting and for dodging enemies, which pretty much summarizes this game up very well. Don't forget to open up the shortcut if you want to go back here later. With the red glowing stones as your checkpoints/teleportation devices, you don't really need this shortcut in my opinion, but I usually grab it anyway, just in case. You can also purchase ammo boxes, Mudtooth's Stew and Mudtooth's Tonic from Mudtooth. The Stew and the Tonic costs 500 scrap each and increase your stamina and health respectively by 25 points. These effects last for 60 minutes and persevere through death. The items are expensive but good to have in your inventory when the going gets a bit rough.
Well, sure. And this is my... Farewell, friend. Come round again. Pull up a pop... What don't I got? You met Commander Root killed her pa. They say her grandma. You ask me. I'm sure. Let's see. I used to live back at Sanctuary. Root ran most of Brabus. I can tell you. Let's see. I used to. Brabus says later on. Well, I know. I ain't putting you to. Let's see. Move to for Sanctuary. What till craziest thing? What time is it? All right. Bet you didn't heck back what they used to tell me. Oh, look. Okay. Before the mud, we scabbed. We saw Corbin once. I'm sure. Well, sure. I tell you how I saw that Deadwood took her. Don't know what they saw the whole thing. Look. Let's see. You read much? Oh. Uh-huh. I reckon the right. Now, it's been a long time since this was my. Ain't no time. Sure. Very well, friend.
After obtaining the pocket watch, it was time for a quick visit back to Ward 13 to give the tarnished ring that I picked up earlier to Reggie. Whenever you return to the ward, a good advice is to always check Ace's shop for upgrading materials. I never quite figured out how her inventory is restocked, so I just check each time I visit and purchase the materials I would need for future upgrades. It can be good to know that her shop is upgraded over time to match your gear score and the upgrading materials required for your current level. An easy way to think of it is that if your gear score is level 5, you should still see iron in the shop, but you should also start seeing forged iron. If your gear score is level 10, you will rarely see regular iron, and you will be more likely to see forged iron and galvanized iron, and so on. I purchased a hydrocoolant just in case it would come in handy later. As I mentioned previously, the tarnished ring can be given to Reggie, but only after you first listen to his backstory. My first ever playthrough, I used to listen to every NPC in this game and sit through every dialogue option, but nowadays I typically breeze through them by pressing space and clicking the left mouse button alternatively.
We'll do our best by anything else? There's... happy day. Keep carrying that light in the dark.
With the tarnished ring handed in and the scavenger trait acquired, there was only a short pit stop left at McCabe's shop to purchase the Mantle of Thorns weapon mod. I thought it might come in handy in future boss fights, but it turned out to be entirely useless, as the 20% reduction in melee damage taken was never enough to survive a single hit from any boss. It may have served a better purpose with a heavy armor build and some additional trait points directed towards enhancing the defensive capabilities, but I have always favored the fast recovery of the light armor roll when dodging, and so I found myself very much dead every time I embraced the Mantle of Thorns. While traversing the overworld, I switched to my trusted hunting rifle for more accurate long-range shots. The dungeon coming up was the Chapel Station, which is a required dungeon in the campaign that leads to the Chapel Church, where the Root Mother resides. I did not find any new equipment on my way there, so if you want to skip ahead you can go to 49:37 in the video, or click the timestamp in the video description.
This isn't looking good.
Before the next dungeon there are some extra consumables to loot outside the station. I missed these items on my first playthrough, so I would like to point them out in this video. First, behind the big white piece of roofing that has fallen down into a leaning position against the wall, there is an oilskin tonic. Immediately around the corner to the left, there is an ammo box behind 2 crates that you can break. The next 2 items are inside the station. After going into the entrance hall of the station, you can break the boxes against the wall under the low ceiling and grab a bloodwort. Finally, right before entering the dungeon proper, you can find a bandage behind a pipe on your right after coming down the stairs. One of the reasons why this dungeon is so demanding of your resources is because all devils have been upgraded to their stronger counterpart, the Ash Devil. This means that they require a couple of extra shots to take down, and they also deal more damage. It can be difficult to spot the difference between devils and Ash Devils. I distinguish between them based on the additional root appendages that the Ash Devil has around its head and that regular devils are missing. So the bulkier enemy is the Ash Devil, while the thinner one is a regular devil. A unique feature of this dungeon is that smaller groups of Ash Devils, usually 2 to 3 of them, are clustered together in the roof of the subway, hanging upside down like bats. You could also say that they are rooted up there. They remain still like statues until the player walks nearby, or if they take damage, at which point they become animated and drop from the ceiling. They also seem to react to gun sounds or when nearby Ash Devils are alerted. I've said it before and I'll say it again. The Hunter's Mark is an excellent choice here as it allows you to clearly see where the Ash Devils and other enemies are, reducing the risk of having them drop on top of you. I'll reiterate the point I made earlier about managing multiple enemies at once. Shoot the closest enemies first. Otherwise you will have to keep dodging their attacks, and you cannot shoot back while dodging. Try to cycle damage across several enemies at once, to halt their assault and lock them in a state of perpetual staggering. With these 2 tips applied, it's just a matter of getting into the flow of the fight and reacting properly to the audiovisual cues presented, for example to dodge the ranged attacks. Last but not least, aim for the weak spots. Another tip I would like to share with you is that some weapon mods force you to stand still while activating them, which means you need to time them in between enemy attacks. I cannot begin to count how many times I have died in the past, for example, when using the Hunter's Mark at the wrong time. On the contrary, there are other mods that allow you to walk around during the activation. This is hugely beneficial as you can actually dodge a lot of ranged attacks by simply walking to either side. This means that you can fire up, for example, the Hotshot mod in the middle of a fight, leading to less downtime and more damage output. The side areas in the subway are not required to get through the dungeon. However, since they may contain valuable equipment, I go through them anyway. There are a few Ash Devils lined up in both rooms, with a stairwell leading to the top floor. Pick off the Ash Devils as you enter the first room and check the floor for loot. Then you can move up to the top floor and check if there is a loot box on the train wagon between the rooms. From my previous playthroughs, I would say there is at least a 50% or higher chance of having a loot box spawn there, which would net you some extra scrap and upgrade materials. Then you can walk across to the other side and work your way down and check the floor for any equipment before returning to the main path. Any alerted Ash Devil will move quite slowly towards you, so it is good to keep an eye out behind you every now and then if one of them were to take the long way around. Otherwise, it should be simple enough to take them down through any choke points you may find, for example an open doorway or a staircase. The Howler is an elite enemy that materializes suddenly out of thin air, opens their mouth wide and screams for a short while. The scream summons a few extra root enemies that spring out of the ground, and the Howler itself teleports away. If you are too close to it during the scream, you will be stunned by the intensity of the sound, leaving you susceptible to receiving damage from nearby enemies. Therefore, it is best to engage the Howler with some distance in mind. Its weak spot is its head, as is usual for many root-type foes, and a few well-placed shots will deal massive damage, often staggering it momentarily as well. I have noticed that the behavior and spawning mechanics of the Howler can be somewhat lacking at times. My guess is that the game logic searches for a node near the player where the Howler can teleport to, and similarly so for the spawned enemies. And the maintenance steel walkways probably don't have that many positions where it may spawn enemies, so the end result in this case was a rather silly looking Howler who just stood there after it howled, with no enemies spawning to support it, and then teleporting back to the same spot it just left, making for an easy kill. Beware that whenever the Howler has screamed and there were no immediate enemy spawns, you will most likely encounter them later when you reach a node that they can spawn on. That's why there were so many Ash Devils spawned as I approached the bottom floor of the second room. Sometimes there are red glowing pods on the ground. These explode if you shoot them or roll into them. I prefer shooting them so I don't accidentally roll into them in the middle of a fight, but you can also just walk past them. They won't detonate by proximity. They can be used to your advantage if you shoot one as an enemy passes by. Then they will take some damage from the explosion and also be set on fire. Speaking of setting things on fire, the flaming enemy I just took down was a Flame Devil, and coming up right now is a fight with 2 Ash Devils and another Flame Devil. I will speak more about them a bit later in the video. First I would like to briefly touch upon another topic. My main grievance with Chapel Station is that there is one elite enemy in particular that may spawn that is very annoying to fight. The Stalker is invulnerable to damage while shrouded in some kind of protective aura, and if you don't damage them enough, and quickly so, they rush at you and instantly kill you. They are a major hassle to deal with, as you're almost always going to be fighting some Ash Devils simultaneously. And they teleport away as soon as they start taking some damage. Putting a damage over time effect on them helps greatly, as this effect stays through teleports and help whittle down the shield barrier. I always dread turning around and seeing a Stalker behind me, because I never feel fully confident that I can beat them, and I also lost one of my hardcore characters in the past to this enemy. Anyhow, with the Stalker defeated, let us return to the previous topic regarding Flame Devils. Flame Devils are a common sight in the Chapel Station. They look like regular devils, only a bit darker, as if their twisted roots have been soaked in some kind of oil. They are typically alone, wandering aimlessly around on the ground of the station with no clear purpose in mind until they spot the player. To beat this adversary there are a few important things to mention. All projectiles lit it on fire. Yes, even ranged attacks from other enemies will set it on fire, increasing its aggression towards the player tremendously. While the Flame Devil is on fire, all fire-based attacks will be effectively useless. This means that the Hotshot weapon mod is a no-go. If you happen to come across a Flame Devil with your Hotshot mod active, you better run, or switch to another weapon. You can also remove it from your weapon temporarily to stop its effect. When the Flame Devil is on fire, it rushes the player and attacks with regular melee attacks. If it gets too close or if you roll into it while dodging, you take damage from the flames and also receive the burning status effect. This can quickly drain your entire health bar unless you put the fire out by rolling, backstepping or applying a hydrocoolant. If you damage it using regular melee attacks, it will not burst into flames. The last point opens up for a completely valid melee engagement tactic, which is rare in this game. Simply run towards it and attack it with melee. You will lock it in a staggering cycle with subsequent melee attacks and can just keep swinging until it is dead. Personally, I still prefer to stay at a comfortable range and shoot it in the head a few times. But you must remember to not use the Hotshot mod during your engagements with the Flame Devils. Coming up soon in the dungeon was the midway checkpoint, and right before it was a Tome of Knowledge. The Tome of Knowledge is a consumable that can be found randomly in the world, and picking it up instantly grants the player an additional trait rank and corresponding point. The overall trait rank can be considered as the player level, which is separated from the gear score as mentioned previously. So while the gear score is a measure of how upgraded the armor set and weapons are, the trait rank is a measure of how much the character itself has grown. You can think of it simply as a level up mechanic for the player. Taking down enemies and bosses and completing certain side quests awards you with experience points, and after 1500 experience points you level up your trait rank and earn 1 trait point. While playing through the game on the Apocalypse difficulty setting, you earn 50% more experience compared to playing on normal, which means you will be generating trait points faster. The downside to playing on this difficulty level is of course that the game scales enemy health and damage to the most extreme, such that regular enemies have 175% more base health and deal 350% more damage, while bosses have 312.5% more health and deal 305% more damage. Personally, I think Apocalypse is not the best option for a first playthrough. Rather, it is more suited for a New Game Plus playthrough, where you will be better prepared for the tough enemy scaling. At the start of the game there is not much diversity in trait availability. Therefore, I typically don't spend many trait points until I either get stuck at a boss fight or unlock a new trait that supports my playstyle. This means I accumulate points over time and then use them in chunks. With that said, trait points are a great utility for tweaking your playstyle and getting the most out of the build you are going for. As you may have figured out by now, I favor a glass cannon type build, with essentially zero defensive capabilities and full focus on maximizing damage. Typically, I often start with spending my first trait points in upgrading endurance, to increase my total stamina points. This allows me to run for longer periods of time and also allows for extra dodging, which is useful when exploring the world and fighting. However, since I obtained the pocket watch from Mudtooth, stamina consumption and regeneration was not of any pressing concern, so I decided instead to invest 9 trait points in the Tormentor trait and 2 points in Elder Knowledge. The idea behind this was to get more damage from the burning status effect, especially during boss fights, and to increase the XP gain slightly. If I had not obtained the Tormentor trait earlier from inflicting a status effect on 100 enemies, I would likely have put all points on Elder Knowledge just to level up my trait rank faster. The farther into the game you progress and the more traits you unlock, the more useful the traits become as a tool for increased survivability. As an example, if you max out the Exploiter and Kingslayer traits, you will have 20% extra weak spot and 25% more critical hit chance. This means that every weak spot crit that you deal will do 3.85 times the base damage, while the usual amount of extra damage is 3 times without the traits. With the Executioner trait adding a whopping 25% extra crit chance at max rank, it means that every shot gets a 1 in 4 chance at inflicting a critical hit, which is incredible. And then you start weaving in different combinations of armor sets, necklaces and rings, and you can create a very strong build if you spend your points right. If you would like to skip through the regular gameplay, the next major item is at 103.45, when I discovered another equipment piece. Towards the later half of the dungeon I found the Aggressor's Bane, which is sadly a ring with a rather limited usage. It works best in synergy with other players, where the wearer draws most of the enemy aggro while others focus on taking them down. In my playthrough I only wore it a single time for a single fight with a single purpose. Interestingly, it was in the fight coming up right after the subway station, in the Church of the Harbinger. The reasoning was simple enough: don the ring and have the enemies attack you and the Root Mother should survive. Well, it did work a lot better than without the ring, and the best part was that the 15% damage reduction actually saved my skin during the fight when I got hit by a hunter's crossbow bolt. But more of that later, after I get out of this place. The rest of the dungeon was just me dealing with all the enemies, so feel free to either continue watching the gameplay or skip ahead to 10803, which is when I reached the exit of the dungeon.
It's over.
Enough room. Light.
Coming up was the Church of the Harbinger, which is where you meet the Root Mother for the first time. She is connected to the root through some sort of communion and will start speaking to you when you approach her altar. After a short dialogue, it appears that she can offer some guidance in how to destroy the root, but she is unable to share that information in her current state. Once the conversation ends, you have to protect her against an onslaught of devils, slayers, and even a Hulk. You must defend her from taking too much damage for 2 whole minutes, all the while more and more enemies are spawning in and around the chapel. This fight can be very challenging because it is still very early on in the game, and you don't have too many options to boost your damage output in terms of weapon mods and other equipment. Especially the Hulk is very annoying to deal with, because it sometimes completely ignores you, even when you're damaging it, and just rushes for the Root Mother, killing her before you can take it down. Not to mention, if you do manage to get its attention, you will still have difficulties in picking it off while dodging its attacks and simultaneously ensuring the Root Mother stays unharmed from devils and slayers. The fight easily tests your multi-management skills and forces you to be at your best to come out on top. As far as strategy goes, I typically destroy all pews. Sometimes I leave the 2 pews in front of the chapel, as I did during my first attempt. This has a few benefits. Destroying the pews allows for more freedom of movement and prevents you from accidentally vaulting over them while trying to dodge enemy attacks, which will almost certainly end up killing you. The last 2 pews force the devils to walk around them to get to the root mother. Just like most breakables, the pews also net you some scrap when destroyed, so if you die a lot in this fight, you can scrounge up a substantial amount of scrap over time. I always start the fight from the altar position so I can have the entire arena in front of me. This allows me to shoot most devils immediately as they are entering the church, which helps giving me the aggro and also to take them down faster. A few well-placed shots with the hunting rifle is usually enough to take them down. The main drawback to this positioning is that there is one pillar on each side that blocks your line of sight toward the middle windows, but this can be easily overcome by simply sidestepping or waiting an extra moment until the devil comes out from behind cover. I like to have the Hunter's Mark active when there are specials inbound like the Slayer. I also save the Hotshot mod for when the first special spawns. Anything after that, I just use the mods whenever they recharge. If you pay close attention between the first attempt and the second attempt, you can see how the Aggressor's Bane makes the devils laser focused on me, even spotting me from outside the windows. This is why I mentioned that this ring would be useful in this fight. Another tactic that I never attempted myself is to leave one devil alive in the arena, kiting it around while dealing with the larger threat of the special enemies. Keeping one devil alive prevents others from spawning, which is something I was not aware of until quite recently. Interestingly, I actually employed a similar tactic in an upcoming boss fight, but I never made the connection to try it out in the Root Mother fight, so I would definitely advise to try this out if you're struggling with this encounter. It got a bit chaotic on my winning attempt, and I only survived the fight because of the ring's additional protection, coupled with an active blood vial that counteracted the bleeding status effect. The fight would have been a lot less chaotic if I had remembered to put bandages on my bar instead of the old skin tonics. Anyhow, it's time for the winning attempt, so I'll keep quiet and let the video play.
It's over.
Bag's full.
First, look there. Find them. I know.
After completing the fight, I quickly went downstairs to pick up the sniper rifle, as this could be useful for the next section. You also receive the Mother's Blessing trait from surviving this encounter. which reduces the ranged damage you take by 0.5% per trait level, up to a maximum of 10%. After going downstairs, you can destroy the pallets, grab the sniper rifle and the extra loot, then proceed to the outside and pick up one extra loot box before heading to the next section through the hole in the side of the chapel. The next overworld was West Court, which is the second half of the Earth campaign. It features much of the same geometry as the first half, with broken spaces and abandoned buildings, complete with multiple new enemies such as shrikes and special elites. One common theme is that there are a lot of open spaces, essentially turning large portions of the map into a shooting gallery. So I decided to try my luck with the sniper rifle for this section. That's it for this video. Thank you for making it to the end, and please consider subscribing to my channel and liking the video if you haven't already. Share your thoughts in the comments section and let me know how your first playthrough in Remnant from the Ashes went. Until next time, let me wish you all a wonderful day.